Hi everybody, welcome to our session looking at threats and in particular threats to our targets. And you'll see that we've titled this Threats to Our Targets, Problems and Their Causes. And that's because of the way that we think about threats, which I'll get to. So threats is often a place where a conversation about doing a plan will start. People are concerned about issues that are affecting their protected area or their community, their landscape, their resources. So often the plans are initiated because of threats. But we like to think about them a bit more deeply to make sure that we're really focusing on those that are the most critical threats. There are lots and lots of things that might be considered threats, but only some of those are things we can do something about and that are big enough and significant enough that changing or fixing them will make a difference. So we're going to think about how do we identify those things that really do affect what's important to us, and then that'll help us get through to good strategies. So again, we're up in the assess section of the conservation standards, and we're nearly through that in that thinking about the critical threats is our sort of second last thing we do in really trying to assess the situation that we're working with. Why do we do this step? Why do we think about threats, and why do we think about them as problems and causes? Like a lot of things in conservation standards, we're really trying to prioritize. We're trying to get to an understanding of the most critical thing to worry about and work on. So the step that we're taking here is to really focus on the most critical threats to our targets that are stopping us from having healthy country or healthy lands, healthy communities. And importantly, we want to focus on the causes of problems, the thing that's actually really creating the issue as the path for action rather than just the problem itself. So rather than focusing on the loss of a population of an important species, for example, we need to focus on what's causing that. So that's what we're going to focus on. It's important to note that threats are critically connected to the work that you've done looking at viability or health. So all that thinking about what is a healthy target, what makes it healthy, what are the attributes and indicators, they are key to understanding then what are the threats. So what is a threat? In simple terms, a threat is the thing that is stopping our target from being healthy. So if something is stopping our target from being healthy, that is, it is making our target, instead of it being good or very good, it's making its health be fair or poor. Whatever is causing that to happen, that is our threat. And we think about it in two parts. When we're seeing one of our attributes or indicators getting worse, that's a problem. So we might say one of our indicators for a healthy waterway is the presence of some fish that people like to hunt and eat. So that's our indicator of a healthy waterway. And if that is getting worse, we're seeing fish disappear, that's a problem. That means our health is going down. Whatever is making that problem happen is called the cause. Sometimes people call it stress, problem, and source of stress. Cause. We use problem and cause. Thinking it in simple terms then, a threat is the problem plus the cause. And really, we really work on the causes. That's what we want to focus on. What do we need to stop? If we were just to work on the problem, it gives us a different path. So let's think about that. If we're saying, oh, we're losing this important species of fish from our waterways, and that's happening because it could be because too many are being taken. It could be because there's a dam upstream, or it could be because a disease has got in. There could be a number of things. We need to try and stop those things from happening. So that's working on the cause. If we were to work on the problem, and they take us down different types of actions. If we were to work on the problem, there aren't many fish left, then they take different actions, reintroduction and things like that. So problems and causes, we want to work on the causes. We need to identify those. Here's an example from our world where we think about the target being affected by the problem being driven by the cause. So our target here is an inland waterway. Our inland waterways look a bit different to yours. And when we think about inland waterways, we think about them as having intact vegetation, having good, strong stream banks and things like that. So the problems might be where we're seeing lots of erosion, lots of trampling of vegetation. They're the problems. And we might say, well, what's causing that? In our case, in a lot of cases, it can be cattle getting into the river or the stream. So they're causing some erosion and some trampling. Now, the reason why it's important to think about it in these ways is because what we're not saying is that cattle are a threat or cows are a threat. What we're saying is that cows in the stream are a threat. And so it's important to really understand what's going on, what is the actual cause, in order to correctly diagnose the issue. So how do we do this step? Best to do it with a small and well-informed team. Good to get lots of opinions, but we really need good understanding and good information here. It's ideal if we've done the work on our targets and their health, so we can bring in the information on what's causing things to happen. You can use, there are software tools around, so there's Maradi, which supports conservation standards, but you can use things like Excel. There are other sorts of tools around that you can use to rank and rate things. You can do this quite more quickly rather than talk about what are the stresses or the problems and what are the causes. You can just go straight to thinking about the causes. But we like to think about the stresses first, or the problems first, because it just sort of helps to think about what your issues are. We say you'll need a good sense of humour because this takes a lot of thinking. So why do we do this? Why do we go through this complicated sort of double step of thinking about problems and causes? It's just because understanding the cause gives us a different understanding of what we need to manage. So let's look at this. Let's think about this as for me as a person. Let's say my problem is that I've got shoulder pain. Yeah, so don't know what's going on, but my shoulder hurts. Now, one cause could be that I'm doing too much swimming. I'm out there doing lots and lots of training, and that's doing too much of that is causing a pain in my shoulder. And so what do I need to do? I need to stop swimming. So that's understanding what's causing that gives me a particular management. But what if my problem isn't that? What if my problem is that I got upset somebody and they thumped me? And so my shoulder is sore because I've been hit by someone. Then my management is different. So I've got the same problem in both cases, shoulder pain, but I've got two very different things that I need to do to fix that. So that's why we try and focus on the cause not the problem, because it gives us really different paths to go down. So here's an example from from an Australian context where we might think our target is traditional knowledge. That is the knowledge that is held by the community to look after their country and their law. The indicator of that being healthy is that the elders, the people who really hold that knowledge, are satisfied that their knowledge is in good condition. We don't ask people to take a test. Ask the people whose knowledge it is. What do you think? The problem here then is that the elders are unsatisfied. They don't think their knowledge is being looked after, and there's lots of different causes to that. For instance, other knowledge is now being used. Lots of Western knowledge is coming in and pushing aside some of that important traditional knowledge. Learning's not happening. The young people aren't coming through and picking up that knowledge and using it. Or the elders just don't know what's going on. They're not being told what's happening and so on. So they're different causes, different things to think about. If you look in the guidelines for planners and management committees that we've referenced before, that also loss of cultural and traditions affecting protected areas. So loss of knowledge of the names of fish and corals and other species. That top piston is not good. You need to be able to use your own language to be able to really communicate well what those values are. And so it's not just an Australian thing. It's a really significant general issue for protected area management. There's lots and lots of different ways of thinking about threats, and in this example, we're thinking about water, and thinking about invasive species. Protected areas are affected by lots and lots of different kinds of threats, which need to be managed. So we've got a long list. In this case, let's say we've got tilapia and carp and different weed species that are also affecting our area. That's great, but how do we decide which ones are the most important to think about? Which ones are the most critical to do? So we've got our list, but now we need to sort out our list and make that list better ordered, so that we know which ones we need to think about first. So we use a fairly simple ranking method, but it works pretty well in putting our threats in order. And we think about three things. So we make ourselves a list of all the different threats, the different causes, and then we do some ranking of those. And firstly, we think about what is the scope, what is the area of damage that threat is operating in. Is it everywhere where the target is, or is it really localized? So it might be that you're worried about a particular weed species, but it might just be in one place, not in the whole protected area, affecting the whole target. So where is it? The second thing we think about is not where is it, but how bad is it? So it might be somewhere very local, but it causes a lot of damage. Or it might be very widespread, but it doesn't do very much. So we need to think about both of those things. And then the last thing we think about is, can we fix it? Can we undo the damage that is done? So if you think about these three criteria, you can see how they work. Something that is very widespread and that is going to destroy our targets, and that if it happens we can't fix it, is something we should be really worried about and try and stop. But if it's something that occurs, it's very local, it only slightly impairs our targets, doesn't do very much damage at all, and it's easy to fix when it happens, well, maybe we shouldn't be too worried about that, because if it happens, we can fix it. So that's why we think about it using those three things. So if I apply those to, you can use different scoring systems, and we'll practice one in our exercise. If we think about the problem here of elders being unsatisfied, you know, what's causing that? The use of other knowledge. We're saying, oh, it's, you know, it's you know, localized. It's not happening everywhere, just in some places. And in those places, you know, it's moderately degrading. It's starting to change the way traditional knowledge is used. But once that change happens, it's really hard to fix. So it's, we give it a 3. And so you have that kind of conversation and rank them. And so if we look at these, we say, well, actually, the one we most need to be worried about is other knowledge coming in. That's the one that we really need to be concerned about. And it's a very simple process, but it helps you to you know, think about your priorities. Now, of course, this is one target, one indicator, one problem. This is from a project in Australia. It's just a good example where eventually you end up with all your targets and all your threats being ranked. It comes up with quite a big table, which is why this takes a bit of time and requires a bit of a sense of humour to get it done. But it gives us a way of understanding threats across all the targets in our protected area. And so ultimately we end up with a ranked list that gives us a guide to action. The things at the top that are high are the things that we should at least talk about first. The things at the bottom that are low, maybe we should talk about them last. So we should worry about fragmentation, the landscape being broken up, before we worry about people putting barriers in the streams. If you have a look at Lake Katubu, at the case study, and the threat ranking there, then you can see that it appears that tilapia is the critical threat that we most need to be worried about. And then there are a number that are really need to be thought about. Pest plants, unsustainable fishing, and so on. So we have a conversation about those, but we should talk about all of those perhaps before we talk about orchid collection. Again, it doesn't mean you don't do anything about the things that are low, but at least talk about and decide whether you're going to do something about the others first, to make sure that you prioritise your work. We'll take this threat list, this prioritised threat list, into the next step to help us further understand what we can do something about and maybe what we can't do something about. But the critical things to take away from this are, you'll have your list of threats. They are decided by looking at your targets, the attributes and indicators of those targets, and seeing what's causing those to be not as healthy as they should be. So what are the problems and what are causing those problems? There are threats, and then we rank those to come up with a final list. Then our exercise will show us how to do that. Okay, thanks everybody.